Colleagues Ali Velshi and Stephanie Ruhle, and you guys have a very big interview with Omarosa Manigault-Newman. A lot of follow-up questions to ask her, guys.
And she's sitting right here. Kristen, thanks so much. Have yourself a great day. We'll catch up with you later. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ali Velshi.
And I'm Stephanie Ruhle. It is Monday, August 13th. Let's jump right into our top story this morning.
We have an exclusive interview with the former assistant to the president, Omarosa Manigault-Newman. The White House official, former apprentice contestant, allegedly recorded her own firing by Chief of Staff John Kelly. We'd like to play it for you now, unedited, in full.
Hi.
Hi there. How are you? Hi. My assistant.
Could you leave this alone?
Sure.
Yep.
Hi.
I'm only going to stay for a couple of minutes. These are lawyers. We've got to talk to you about leaving the White House. It's come to my attention over the last few months that there's been some pretty, in my opinion, significant integrity issues related to you and use of government vehicles and some other issues. They'll walk you through the legal aspects of this, but there is some, from my view, there's some money issues and other things, but from my view, the integrity issues are very serious. I'm stuck with my past experience, and that is when we hold people accountable in the military, I compare what I see here at the White House and other issues that I've had to deal with, and say, what would I do to this in this case if I was in the Pentagon dealing with a Marine or a soldier or something like that. And in the issue that you may or may not have a full appreciation for, but I think you do, this would be a pretty high level of accountability, meaning a court-martial. And we're not suggesting any legal action here. Just stay with me. Just stay with me. Yep. That it would be a pretty serious offense. So with that, I'm just going to ask you, these gentlemen will explain it, and we'll bring a personnel person in after they talk to you. But just to understand that I'd like to see this be a friendly departure. There are pretty significant legal issues that we hope don't develop into something that will make it ugly for you. But I think it's important to understand that if we make this a friendly departure, we can all be, you can look at your time here in the White House as a year of service to the nation, and then you can go on without any type of difficulty in the future relative to your reputation. But it's very, very important, I think, that you understand that there are some serious legal issues that have been violated, and you're open to some legal action that we hope, I think we can control, right? So with that, if you would stay here with these gentlemen, they'll lay this thing out. And
Can I ask you a couple of questions? Is the president aware of what's going on?
Let's not go down the road. This is a non-negotiable discussion.
I don't want to negotiate. I've never had a chance to talk to you, General Kelly.
Yeah,
so if this is my departure, I'd like to have at least an opportunity to understand.
We can talk another time. This has to do with some pretty serious integrity violations. So I'll let it go with that. So the staff and everyone on the staff works for me, not the president. And so after your departure, I'll inform him if he gets interested on where you may be. So with that, I'll let you go. And gentlemen, if you could take it. Thanks. Okay. Yep. I'm really sorry we're here.
And just this morning, Omarosa released a tape she made of a phone call with the president himself the day after she was fired.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
No, nobody even told me about it. Nobody.
Wow.
They run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
Hi, joining us now, Omarosa Manigault-Newman, author of Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House. That, of course, was not the full meeting with John Kelly. It was a 2-hour meeting. That's the tape we got from you. Do you have more recordings?
Oh, absolutely.
Are you planning on releasing them?
I don't know. I'm going to watch to see. They've been threatening legal action. They're trying to figure out, how to stop me. They're trying to penalized me because I would not accept the $15,000 a month deal that they offered me for the fake job on the Trump campaign. So I'm expecting that they're going to retaliate, and so I'm just going to stand back and wait.
But you made the tapes because you thought, I'm assuming, that they would retaliate and say, well, it's her word against ours. What does it say about the White House that you would make those tapes? Do you think the president is taping people?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the president talked often, as you'll see in Unhinged, about how important it was to tape your enemies and to make sure that you had information on your enemies.
So more than just theoretically, though, you think he's actually taped people inside the White House?
He threatened Comey. We have to take him at his own words. He said to Comey, you know, you better watch out because, you know, he's insinuated that there might be tapings. And if he does, that would be a very sad day in America because that would be reminiscent of Nixon. But one of the things you'll see in Unhinged is exactly how he kind of unravels from day one in the White House and how I saw very early on that he wasn't really fit to hold the office of the presidency.
He's working hard to undermine your credibility. He tweeted this morning, wacky Omarosa, who got fired 3 times on The Apprentice, now got fired for the last time. She never made it, never will. She begged me for a job, tears in her eyes. I said, okay. People in the White House hated her. She was vicious, but not smart. I would rarely see her, but heard really bad things, nasty to people, and would constantly miss meetings and work. When General Kelly came on board, he told me she was a loser and nothing but problems. I told him to try working it out if possible because she said only great things about me until she got fired. What's your response?
You know, I think it's sad that with all the things that's going on in the country that he would take time out to insult me and to insult my intelligence. This is his pattern with African Americans, and he doesn't know how to control himself. He has no impulse control, and he doesn't have the tact for the presidency. It's actually really sad to watch him become unhinged, no pun intended.
If this was his pattern, is he becoming unhinged? You've known him for more than 15 years, and you chose to work for him.
You know, in 2003, Donald Trump was sharp. He was somebody that I aspired to be like. I patterned myself after him when I went on The Apprentice to try to, you know, win the opportunity to run one of his companies. But the president, he's different than the person I met back in 2003. He has some serious mental impairment. I'm not a doctor.
Can you give us an example? Can you give us we can only see from the tweets or what we see on TV, but from being inside the White House, from knowing him from back in The Apprentice and from being inside the White House for many months, what did you see specifically that would give you the assessment this guy's unhinged, he's in mental decline?
Stephanie, first of all, he would say one thing in the morning, and as a part of the comm team, we would go and try to formulate a plan, a communications plan to implement. By that afternoon, he will have tweeted something without telling us, completely contradictory of what he said in the morning. And it would not help advance the policy that people had worked on for months and months and months.
Like what?
You know, we were talking about early on doing something to help combat the violence in Chicago that we have seen rise to levels that are just unacceptable. And at one moment, he's tweeting that he wants to do something about Chicago, and then the next minute, he's complaining about the Democratic mayor of Chicago and saying, just let the people die there. And that's not appropriate. And he has done nothing, by the way, to help combat the battle zone. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You wrote, page 217 of your book, that the change in him since his prime was dramatic. You use an expression to say the blade has been dulled. You talk about on The Apprentice, there had been a mix-up on one of the episodes where a contestant lost money on a task and they were discussing figures, and he was able to recall and calculate things. And then you talk about working on a speech with him where he can't sort of keep track of things. You keep telling him something, he goes off message. I want to talk about the Lester Holt interview, where you said that the team prepared him well. Then he went into the interview and he said what a lot of people believe to be the truth, that he fired Jim Comey over Russia. So was he being prepped to lie?
He was being prepped by Hope Hicks and the comms team to say that the DOJ had come up with this memo so that they could justify the firing of Comey.
So
but
were you
he
in that
has
position too?
I mean,
was
you were
not.
That was definitely Hope Hicks, press secretary kind of thing. But I was really, really surprised that he would implicate himself. That's when you know someone is mentally challenged, when they would even jeopardize their own livelihood by saying things that are just insane at times.
So if the comms team prepped the president to lie to Lester Holt,
they prep him to lie every day.
And in the end, he told the truth. What are they lying about? Like, let's go through. Has President Trump said, with you present?
Stephanie, let me walk you through. We would go into our prep for Sarah Huckabee's Sanders briefings, and there would be a cadre of attorneys coming in to help her formulate a response that was within the realms of legal bearings.
Is that why we see her reading responses so often?
Absolutely. Those responses more than likely are prepared by counsel's office in consultation, sometimes with the campaign, sometimes with the RNC, sometimes with outside counsel.
But did you ever ask the question, why are we lying?
All the time.
And the answer was?
This is how they do it. This is the Trump administration at its best.
Then why would you stay there and work with a pack of liars?
Because right now, there is no African-American senior staffer in the White House. And there are issues that face this community that can't be ignored. They're making decisions about us without us. And I knew that if I left, that this community would suffer. And in fact, to this day, Stephanie, there is no one serving in the White House in a senior administration position, and they don't even care. They haven't even made an effort to fulfill my position. In recent history, we have not seen an administration without an African-American assistant to the president serving in the White House.
You recount all the nicknames that the president had for people, Benjamin Button for Jeff Sessions and others. Did you ever hear the president in his deliberations about firing Jeff Sessions or Jim Comey? Were you in on that decision?
No,
or Robert Mueller, for that matter?
No, I wasn't.
So when you say it was your job to stay there, you wanted to be there to help elevate the African-American community. And since you left, that position hasn't been fulfilled.
No.
What did you do to help elevate the African-American community? Who did you bring in? If without you, there's no one else there.
So glad you asked this question.
Then
no one
please
has
tell
asked
us.
that question, Stephanie. So let's talk about from day one. Within the first day, we started working on an executive order for the White House initiative on historically black colleges and universities. I've attended 3 HBCUs. I went to Central State University undergrad, Howard University for my master's in doctoral studies, and Payne Theological for my ministerial studies. And so HBCUs was my passion. Within the first 30 days, we passed that executive order that helps 300,000 students at HBCUs all over the country. And then we moved into Black History Month, where I wanted to enlighten the president on these types of issues.
Frederick Douglass? That didn't work.
Unfortunately, in the event that I had to oversee, he thought that Frederick Douglass was still alive. The other thing is,
why didn't you say anything?
One more thing, Stephanie.
You really hurt your credibility when the president said that and you stood behind it.
Would you complain about NBC while you're sitting at this table out in public about the things that go on here? Because, you know, I've been a part of the NBC family for a very long time. There's a lot that goes on, but it's not proper for you to complain about your employer while you're sitting behind that desk.
No, but if you don't believe in what they're doing, you stand up and you quit.
Don't ask me to do something you wouldn't do yourself. It's not proper. There's a proper chain to do everything, and I did that. I submitted my concerns and complaints to the proper people. But to ask me to do something that is so, I mean, it's ludicrous to go and complain.
Well, Gary
publicly
Cohn did right after Charlottesville.
No, he pouted a bit, but he stayed as well. And nobody's saying
he
Gary
did more than pout.
But he didn't leave immediately. You know why he stayed? Because he was working on policies that he couldn't just immediately abandon. How many months did he stay after?
About 6 months after. You didn't leave on your own accord, though.
Well, no, I was planning to leave at the 1-year mark, and that is very well documented by so many people. And, you know, in some ways, General Kelly did me a favor, but can I just say one thing while I'm here with you? I'd like to get my personal stuff back. You know, I've been waiting for 7 months for the White House because I wouldn't sign the agreement with the campaign, and so they refused to give me my things. And so I'd like those 7 boxes of my personal items back from the White House without them being retaliatory as they are doing, because it's my stuff.
Before we go, you say that President Trump is a master manipulator, but he's also in mental decline. How can you be both?
You can be both. They're not mutually exclusive. You can actually have some levels of brilliance and have some semblance of mental decline, as we see in the president.
Omarosa, thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks for allowing me to be here. Thanks, Stephanie.
All right.
Thanks for your time.
Omarosa Manigault-Newman, we learned a lot of new information, which we're going to dig through over the next hour on Velshi and Ruhle. Also coming up, breaking news from the Washington Post. FBI Special Agent Peter Strzok fired over anti-Trump texts.
I woke up.
All right, welcome back to Velshi and Ruhle. We got some breaking news we were just telling you about before we went to the break. FBI agent, Special Agent Peter Strzok has been fired from the FBI. A lot of you will say, well, wasn't he already fired? He was fired from the Mueller, or he was moved from the Mueller investigation. Strzok was a controversial figure in the Justice Department's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and the investigation into possible cooperation with the Trump campaign. Pete Williams is covering the story for us. Pete, again, I think a lot of people thought Strzok was already out. He was still an employee of the FBI.
I'm completely confused.
Oh, yes, that's right. He was removed from the Mueller investigation last year after Robert Mueller was told by the Justice Department's Inspector General about the discovery of these text messages between Strzok and Lisa Page, who was the FBI's counsel's office. But he continued to be an employee. But the further blow to him was some devastating language in the Inspector General's report that came out earlier this year, just a short time ago, within the last month or so, that revealed some new text messages between Strzok and Page. And after that, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, said that the FBI would undertake change in the FBI's culture to make sure this sort of thing didn't happen again, and that appropriate disciplinary steps would be taken. Now, his legal counsel has told the Washington Post that first reported this firing, which I've since confirmed with some law enforcement officials. His lawyer is saying that this is not the normal way this should have happened, that he should have been afforded the complete disciplinary process, but that instead the FBI's deputy director, David Bowditch, informed Strzok on last Friday, that he would be fired. So whether he'll undertake legal action, remember that the FBI's former deputy director, Andrew McCabe, has talked about legal action against the FBI and the Justice Department for how he was fired. He says there was presidential influence. Whether they're going to undertake legal action here, I don't know, but his lawyer has said that the way this has been handled is very irregular. But the other thing to note about this, of course, is Strzok has been the probably single most often cited reason that some Republicans in the House have been critical of the investigation, of the FBI, of the Justice Department. So removing him certainly takes away what has been a very sore point for congressional Republicans who have been critical of the Mueller investigation.
Pete, stay with us. I want to bring in MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savalas. Danny, okay, so just walk us through this, because according to Strzok's lawyer, the Bureau's internal disciplinary course should be, I want to make sure I get it right, a demotion and a 60-day suspension. But in this case, it was overruled, and this guy's just gotten fired. That's what Strzok's lawyer is saying. Is that true?
That's right. And there are some really interesting legal issues that could come up because public government employees have different First Amendment rights than the rest of us, private sector employees. And a government employee like an FBI special agent can be disciplined and even terminated for what he may say in his personal life if it is significantly violative of the FBI's own procedures, own policies, and it doesn't fall within the limited free speech that government employees actually have.
So what likely cost him his job here? Because his testimony was fairly robust. Is it the stuff that he ultimately admitted to doing, or the position he took? I mean, he got into it, if you recall, with those members of Congress in a fairly heated fashion. Do we know why they would have made this decision?
It could be personal conduct. It could be the speech that was contained within his text messages. It could be the violation of having a relationship with somebody else in the government. It could be any of those things. But ultimately, his lawyer may have a point that if he was not afforded the proper disciplinary process, then the FBI failed to follow its own procedure, and if anything, ultimately, it could be actionable civilly.
What does this mean, if anything, for the Russia investigation?
Well, I think for the most part, as the Russia investigation is concerned, from an evidence-gathering standpoint, at least Congress has gotten a lot out of this agent. Going forward, to what degree, and by that I mean he testified in front of Congress, they had their opportunity to question him. But going forward, to the extent perhaps the Mueller team wants to speak to him, well, the general rule with everything Mueller is that we really don't know whether or not, or if, or when, or how a witness or a target or a suspect or anything might actually speak to Mueller if they ever do at all.
Pete, any sense from you as to whether there's any effect at all on the Mueller investigation or the other investigations at Congress underway?
Yeah, here's what I would say is the effect on the Mueller investigation. None. Remember, he hasn't been involved in it for a year now. Yes, he was involved in the early stages of it, and the early stages, remember, of an investigation of the Clinton Foundation. And remember, one of Strzok's points in his defense that his lawyer has said is that he wasn't trying to do anything to damage Donald Trump politically. If he was, he would have disclosed or help Hillary Clinton. If he was trying to do that, he would have disclosed the Clinton Foundation investigation, which he didn't do. So I don't think this isn't going to affect the Mueller investigation at all. The question is whether it will affect the public perception of the Mueller investigation, as that's been as the House Republicans have tried to shape it.
Pete, thanks very much. Pete Williams and Danny Savalas. We're going to be right back with more reaction to our interview with former Assistant to the President Omarosa Manigault-Newman, including news that staff prepped President Trump to lie for his interview with NBC's own Lester Holt.
And not just that, every day when Sarah Sanders would sit down with the president to prepare for those press briefings, lawyers would be in the room to figure out how they could navigate answers. And when we said they would be navigating answers to lie to the American people, and Omarosa's answer was, that's the Trump way. The whole thing, bizarre.
So was he being prepped to lie?
He was being prepped by Hope Hicks and the comms team to say that the DOJ had come up with this memo so that they could justify the firing of Comey.
Welcome back to Velshi and Ruhle. That was former Assistant to the President Omarosa Manigault-Newman explaining that White House staff preps the president to lie. She said she expects a counterattack from the White House and believes White House staff was being recorded by the president.
The whole thing. Think about this. James Comey taking contemporaneous notes. Michael Cohen, the president's longtime fixer, tapes the president. And Omarosa, who's known him since the early 2000s, worked with him with The Apprentice and the White House. And remember, she didn't quit. She was fired. People in his inner circle taping him. Why? Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. News One Now's Roland Martin and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savalas still with us. Kelly, to you first, how tricky is this for the White House? We know that when someone leaves, when they say something against the president, the White House punches down. But in this case, she's got tapes. And if she has more tapes, how dicey is it for this White House to come out swinging?
And, Steph, often when people leave the White House, they have a lot of concern about what comes next in their career chapter and would be perhaps far more reluctant to take on the White House. But Omarosa Manigault-Newman is a formidable adversary on the outside based on the skill set she's brought to bear here. Willing to tape inside the White House, willing to talk very bluntly and provocatively about the president. For the White House, it appears they're taking a personal approach, going after her character to suggest that merely by taking on the issue of planning to tape, keeping the tapes, going into secure areas with a recording device, that undercuts her credibility. That gets us not talking about the underlying issues to some degree that she's raising about the president's attitudes on race or his competence for the job. Also, expect the president to continue to punch down, as you described it, on Twitter. He acknowledges today on Twitter that it may not be presidential to go after someone who is, sort of the one-name wonder, Omarosa, but he is doing it. And in part, it gets us talking talking about some of the things that have brought the chaos to the White House that we've seen over the years. At times, a chaos in which the president has flourished, and at times which he is the controller of that chaos, and sometimes someone has the better half of it. And perhaps in at least this moment, Omarosa Manigault Newman is getting a lot of attention. They are describing her as disgruntled. They are saying that she did not conduct herself properly. When she talks about things like prepping the press secretary or the president, that is standard, but she adds the issue of prepping him to lie. But prep sessions are standard in White Houses. That is not anything that should be alarming, but her message is that it's about lying. That's something that a lot of other people have accused the White House of and the president of, so there's sort of in the ether corroboration to some of her views, even if in the specifics we may not be able to go through each moment and say who is the real villain here. But this is an opportunity for the White House to hold her up and to try to shoot at her character at a time when, you know, the backstory of this is they had a long and mutually productive relationship for 15 years in their prior life in reality television.
It's not clear.
Will there be another chapter for these two? Who knows?
There's a lot of people who aren't sure who to believe in this sort of thing. I will say one of the questions that, Roland, one of the questions that Stephanie was trying to get to the bottom of is Omarosa said she didn't leave earlier because she was trying to elevate the position of African Americans in the White House. It is certainly no better. It's probably substantially worse than when she was there. I mean, why don't people leave when the president says crazy things that that his former staffers say that he said?
Easy, a 5-letter word. It's called power. I mean, look, we're talking about the White House. We're talking about serving the President of the United States. It's not like you get these jobs every single day of the week. And so that's why people, frankly, are uneasy about leaving. Look how many people have yet to resign after his comments about Charlottesville. And so people said, oh, folks are going to leave. It didn't happen because it's about power. Now, here's something that people have to understand. Everybody's talking about Omarosa taping conversations. First of all, Washington, D.C. has one-party consent. The White House is not some special thing where somehow you can ignore Washington, D.C. laws. Also, this administration did not have policies in place. In 2017, Donald Trump sat down with a number of television anchors before his speech at the joint session of Congress. I was one of those anchors. When we walked in, we did not have to check our phones or iPads. I participated in a number of meetings with off-the-record meetings with President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden. That was a policy in place. In January of 2018, before his State of the Union speech, another luncheon with television anchors. I was a part of that one with President Trump. We did not have to check devices. It wasn't until I believe it was in May when I met with Jared Kushner at the White House where that was actually a policy. When you walk into the West Wing, they said, okay, we need you to put your devices in the locker and then lock it up. That was the first time in the 2.5 years that I visited the White House under Donald Trump where you had to put your devices away. So that was actually on them. They didn't have control of their own White House when it came to carrying devices into meetings.
Ali, I ask you, people are saying, so hold on a second. Suddenly now you're saying Omarosa is the credible person, but don't you think the broader issue here isn't it's Omarosa versus the president? The president has continued to say he surrounds himself by the very best people. Look at the amount of people. You've got Paul Manafort currently on trial. Chris Collins, the first member of Congress to support the president, just arrested for insider trading. And you've got someone like Omarosa who's now calling the president a master manipulator and a con artist. You could say the same thing about her. It's really about look at this administration, who the president is and who he surrounds himself with.
Right. Stephanie, it's very simple. It's very simple. If the White House wants to say she has no credibility, we have undeniable lies on record from the White House. And so let's just cut to the chase. Okay, let's say everybody has low credibility. Okay, but you still have to say, okay, what's the credence to what she's actually saying? And so that's what you have to deal with. And so this president has lied. We know this. He's actually tweeted one thing, then 3 days later tweeted something else, and then saying, I never said it. And so they can go after Omarosa all they want to, but here's the deal. He hired her. He brought her in. They listened to her.
Multiple
they sent
times.
Her around the country and the world.
Apprentice 3 times.
But I am curious about whether her discussion about, because you brought up Gary Cohn, who was unhappy with the president after Charlottesville, but did stick around for some time, and then finally the tariffs were the thing that broke it for him. Omarosa said she had a mission there, and the mission was for African Americans. That mission was getting nowhere. That seemed to be clear to most Americans a long time ago. It took her a while to get around to that.
Well, first of all, I mean, look, I've talked to Omarosa. I talked to her throughout her tenure in the White House. In fact, I was texting her before her conversation that you guys just had her. And the bottom line is there were things that she was trying to do. I had her on the Tom Joyner Morning Show and also my TV One show talking about those things. She's absolutely correct that there are very few African Americans who are in senior leadership positions at the White House. And so
she didn't help that, though.
Huh?
She didn't help that. Michael Steele had put forth a list of African Americans, and according to Michael Steele, she blocked them.
Well, of course, right, because you also had this contentious battle between a number of black Republicans and Omarosa, and so you had those battles. And trust me, I was talking to both sides as they were all fighting one another in terms of, like, okay, you know, what is going on here? And so at the end of the day, you did have her in terms of having an agenda and what she was trying to do and trying to achieve. But the bottom line is this here: when you examine this whole deal, and you can go back and forth, you can't trust her, listen to her, listen to Sarah Huckabee Sanders or President Donald Trump. At the end of the day, the question then becomes, do you have a president who is fully aware of these issues? And what is it about this administration where they do default to lying? We have the evidence on that. That's not even a dispute. That's not even a debate. And so they have to contend with that. And so they have a burden of proof to deal with her on this.
I don't think it's
yes,
default.
if she says she has other tapes,
but I don't think they default
if
to
I'm
lying.
them, tread carefully.
What Omarosa told us is they actively pursue an agenda of lying. That's different than default.
Right. So the other question we had is whether or not she had other recordings. Let's listen to what she said. Do you have more recordings?
Oh, absolutely.
Are you planning on releasing them?
I don't know. I'm going to watch to see. They've been threatening legal action. They're trying to figure out, how to stop me. They're trying to penalize me because I would not accept the $15,000 a month deal that they offered me for the fake job on the Trump campaign. So I'm expecting that they're going to retaliate. And so I'm just going to stand back and wait.
What does retaliate mean? Because she could take a punch.
Let's ask Danny. Danny, I mean, I don't know who retaliates against whom, what's legal here, whether taking that recording into John Kelly, which was remarkably clear, is legal.
Her book is retaliating for getting fired.
Right. So talk to me about this more recordings and whether she has the ability to release them.
Omarosa has a clever legal strategy here. She knows her history. If you look back at the Fire and Fury book, there were all kinds of threats about the author back then, and nothing ever really materialized. Plus, you look at the Michael Avenatti approach to litigation, which is, you know what, you want to sue us? Bring it. And that's exactly what you can do because the Trump administration and President Trump simply can't initiate litigation. It would be a path to self-destruction. It would be another way to drag the president
because he might have to testify, or they might have.
Maybe, although since he's presently in office, there's argument that he couldn't be hauled into court or hauled into a deposition. But do you really want to open that can of worms? And history shows in the last couple of years that they don't. They're not interested. There's no issue with recording it surreptitiously, at least under D.C. law, because D.C. is a one-party state. As long as one party to the communication consents to its recording, then it's legal. She doesn't appear to have discussed national security issues, just really employment issues. So while it may have been
weird, even from a place of employment, that John Kelly, her new boss, would take her in to a room like that, the Situation Room, and fire her with no one else even present? I mean, corporate America doesn't work that way.
It's weird, but a lot of things are weird. This is not a traditional employment.
Other people came in, but for a large portion of it, it's just Omarosa and John Kelly. And if they viewed her as a risk or a treacherous person, you would think he would sort of want to be staffed up.
The traditional human resources approach, you're absolutely right, would be to bring in at least one other person for that discussion. But this is not the White House administration and John Kelly. They may not have that kind of experience in terminating or disciplining an employee, so they just did it ad hoc by the seat of their pants. And in that case, I mean, isn't it strange that Omarosa was actually recording? Does she have more recordings, and is she going to use them as leverage in case she's sued? Possibly, but even without additional recordings, she knows that in the past, the president is in just too fragile a position to be initiating litigation at this point.
The lawyers are in the room the whole time. They're not. It's not just her and
Kelly. What do you got there about?
Kelly, am I mistaken? It wasn't just, maybe I misunderstood. I thought she had said it was Omarosa and John Kelly for about an hour and 15 minutes, and that's when others joined. Am I mistaken? The lawyers were there the whole time?
Well, based on the recording account, General Kelly asks Omarosa Manigault Newman's assistant to leave, but a couple of times refers to the lawyers who were present in the room. So I think lawyers were there. I'm not an independent expert on this, but I do think that the intention was to have the employment lawyers there while she was being dismissed by him. And the Situation Room is a multi-room space in the White House. And what is interesting about it is, of course, their conversation was, it appears, limited to her employment, but you're in an environment where there are potentially national security issues that would be discussed in the broader area, which is why it's such a surprise that she would bring the device in, and a surprise that he would hold this meeting there. We don't know his calendar. Was he already in that facility? It is a multi-room situation, no pun intended, in the lower part of the White House. But I think that, you know, those details will be borne out about who was in the room or who was not. Clearly, she takes it as a threat that he is talking about her reputation, wanting to shut it down in terms of any interaction between General Kelly and Omarosa at the time. And then he says he's going to turn it over to the lawyers for. And we don't really even know what the alleged grievances of her financial misdeeds, as he describes it to her, that there were things,
he sort of talked about the use of cars
involving,
Hey,
use of a government car. And
Allie and Stephanie, also keep in mind, this happened during a White House Christmas party. She was fired during a White House Christmas party. And so they came down, they went to the Situation Room. There was a party upstairs for staffers, and she was there. Her husband was actually looking for her while this was actually happening. So this wasn't like even in the middle of the day. It was doing a Christmas party.
Before we go, I do want to draw a comparison. Remember, we've often heard from Trump supporters, take him seriously, but not literally. And Omarosa, who's known him again for 15 years, talked about his mental fitness. Let's share that.
He has some serious mental impairment. I'm not a doctor.
Can you give us an example? Can you give us we can only see from the tweets or what we see on TV, but from being inside the White House, from knowing him from back in The Apprentice, and from being inside the White House for many months, what did you see specifically that would give you the assessment, this guy's unhinged, he's in mental decline?
Stephanie, first of all, he would say one thing in the morning, and as a part of the comm team, we would go and try to formulate a plan, a communications plan to implement. By that afternoon, he will have tweeted something without telling us, completely contradictory of what he said in the morning. And it would not help advance the policy that people had worked on for months and months and months.
That policy she talked about there was around violence in Chicago. And something that stood out to me, she said, you know, on one hand, he would say he cares so much about it, we have to stop all this. And then on the other hand, she'd say he'd go after the Democratic mayor and say, let them die. I mean, that's...
Yeah, the whole thing is kind of remarkable. All right, Unhinged is the name of that book. Kelly, thanks very much. Kelly O'Donnell, Roland Martin, and Danny Savalas.
Thanks a lot.
Allie, I think remarkable is a perfect word, because the issue is not, do you believe Omarosa, do you believe the president?
It's just all...
The issue is, this is who is in the White House in 2018. Well, she left in 2017, but speaks to the picture there.
Okay, coming up next, a disturbing video that's gone viral. Officials are now investigating this attack. A Baltimore police officer caught on camera beating a man who was later released without charge. You're watching Velshi and Ruhle. Welcome back. A Baltimore police officer has resigned after a disturbing video showing him beating a man. Let's take a look at this. This is the video that went viral. The officer is seen throwing a number of punches and eventually forcing 26-year-old Deshaun McGreer to the ground. Baltimore police say the situation escalated when McGreer refused to hand over his ID. His lawyer says he's got a fractured jaw, fractured ribs, and damage to his eye socket. The second officer seen in the video has been placed on administrative duties pending an investigation.
Let's bring in Darren Porcher, retired NYPD lieutenant and criminal justice professor. Darren, what in God's name is happening here?
I mean, this is an atrocity to say the least. And what it does is it violates the public trust. When we go back to what happened with Freddie Gray just a couple of years ago, you have that symbiotic relationship that should exist between police and community. Police gain tips from the community, but it all focuses on that level of trust.
But what would be a scenario? Listen, we can't see the video before this.
Right.
But what would be the scenario where this would be the end result?
Well, just to give you a background on me, I was a lieutenant in the NYPD Internal Affairs Bureau. Oftentimes, they investigated these types of cases. In addition to that, I was a sergeant in the NYPD's police academy where I trained recruits. Police are there to restrain individuals and use the minimum amount of force necessary. This is clearly not the case here. What the officer should have done is he should have restrained the individual. Once the force was no longer necessary, that person should have been restrained and brought into custody. And we as the public, we see this as an atrocity because now it goes back to we're taking back that police-community relationship 10 years prior. And the African-American community has had this acrimonious relationship with police. And we look to 21st century policing and restoring the public's trust in law enforcement. And this goes in a different direction.
McGreer's attorney said this about the fact that both his client and the officer are both black. Let's listen.
Well, the thing is that, again, it cuts across racial lines. You've got some bad white officers, you've got some bad black officers. The black officers oftentimes are more aligned with the blue uniform than the brown skins of the people that they are policing.
That's a lot in one sentence, but this is an issue because Baltimore has a history of trouble between, as you just said, the African-American community and the police. So how do you mix this all in?
Well, just bear in mind, you had an African-American officer and you had an African-American that was arrested. African-Americans do want to be policed accordingly, and they didn't sign up to have other African-American officers assault them. So it goes back to that relationship where the two entities need to coexist, and how do you effectively bring people into custody and not embark upon a boxing match, but professional policing. And that's the issue that we have here, the need for professional policing in instances like this, which creates a better or more harmonious environment for the African-American community and law enforcement.
Then just to go back, Freddie Gray was 3 years ago. Does this video, to you, is it a one-off, or does it show that nothing has improved in 3 years?
Well, it's very difficult to isolate this incident as to what's happening or what the precedence is in that department. But the truth of the matter is, this is a viral video that does set back that relationship between police and community.
Internal Affairs. You know, I'm a Law and Order SVU expert. That is more than an enthusiast, an expert. That means this guy was serious business.
He is serious business, no question. Darren, good to see you as always. Darren Porcher is a former NYPD lieutenant and criminal justice professor. All right, we're going to have a look at your money when we come back. Rent prices are down for the rich, but up for everybody else. We're going to break down the growing income disparity in housing and how it could affect your bottom line.